Hey there, it's Silver. This is Bullet Heaven, where we take a look at a couple of different games in this sort of emergent genre and figure out what stands out and why. And this time I've got two different games to actually take a look at, one of which is in early access, the other is not, although it did spend about a year in the early access system and definitely benefited from it a lot. So the first one to take a look at is Death Must Die. This is a relatively new release that's currently in the early stages of its early access campaign. It's only been out for about a month at this point. And the first thing I wanted to mention about this game is just how it looks in general, because I think it has a really cool look to it. It's got some really nice particle effects and things, which are actually, I think, more important than people give credit for in this genre, since part of the entire point is the satisfaction of carving your way through thousands of enemies, and it's a lot better if it looks really flashy and stylish while you're doing it. So having fun particle effects and things is actually a really good part of what makes the combat in this genre actually feel satisfying. But it's not just about the particle effects, because the overall aesthetic itself is kind of a specific dark fantasy, sort of downtrodden, desaturated aesthetic. And honestly, what it reminds me of more than anything else is if the first Diablo were made like 5 years before it actually was. I think it would kind of look like this, and this is definitely very Diablo-esque in terms of its overall appearance. And in this case, you'll be taking control of one of a couple of different heroes. There are currently 6 in the game, and each one has their own sort of spread of stats, like their maximum health. I think their dash recharge is a little bit different, their base movement speed, and of course a basic attack that everyone has that's completely different from everyone else's. And one of the big differences that you don't see very often in this genre that helps this game stand out is its itemization system. It's got a Diablo ARPG style loot mechanic, where sometimes enemies and other containers and things will drop loot, and you actually have a grid inventory that you can pick this loot up into and equip it to your various characters. And of course, loot has all sorts of different stats, from weapons that simply make their attack stronger to gloves that allow them to suck in experience gems from a larger radius and all sorts of different things like that. Every different character has a full equipment sort of paper doll that you can equip with all the various things that you find, and you'll also find that a lot of the gear is limited to certain characters. So especially when it comes to like weapons and chest armors and things like that, they're often based on the sort of class that that character is, so each one is going to be specific to a certain character. And the UI is really nice in this regard, because it allows you to simply switch between all the various characters you have unlocked and just use your basic grid inventory to equip each one individually, so you don't have to keep switching out to different characters in order to change what you have equipped. You can just go to your inventory screen and swap out from character to character there and equip them all individually, so it's made as easy as possible, which is something that I was actually worried about when I first saw that this game had an equipment system but also had several different characters. I was sort of worried that since the equipment is persistent between all characters, everyone only has that one inventory grid, so I was a little bit worried that it would get kind of annoying to like keep switching out in the safe area between characters in order to sort of empty this grid and equip everyone with what they needed, and you'd have to do this like after every single run. But no, they thought of that and they made it a lot more pleasant than that, and you just switch tabs. It's as easy as possible, which is really nice. And of course, this is basically the game's version of like a meta progression system. You know, normally in this genre, it's pretty normal to have some sort of persistent upgrades that you earn, you purchase through multiple runs, and they make your characters more and more powerful each time. This game doesn't really have that in the traditional sense, but it does have this equipment system which acts like the same kind of thing. You will gather all sorts of pieces of equipment and then equip people with them in order to make them stronger run by run. And there's also a bit of a different method of like upgrading characters. Sort of sometimes while you're playing as a character, you will complete a sort of achievement, like a feat of some kind, where you kill a certain number of a certain kind of enemies, or you travel a certain amount of distance. Every character has several different ones that you can get. And when you unlock these, you also unlock a sort of, it's almost like a subclass for that character. It's like a blessing that you can choose whenever you choose what character you want to play. You can choose from all the various unlocked sort of achievement blessings, and these will alter how the character plays in certain ways. And this can be a pretty significant difference in how that character works. Like, you may have one that gives you half the number of total dashes, but gives you an infinite magnet distance, so you can pull in everything on screen without actually having to get close to it. Or say one that gives you a higher and a higher attack speed for every 3 levels you get while playing as that character, so as you're leveling up through a run, you'll just get faster and faster. But the other big thing, and in my opinion the biggest thing that helps this game stand out in the genre, is how it does its in-run upgrades and stuff, because it's going for more of like a Hades-inspired system. Instead of leveling up and choosing weapons and upgrades from like a passive list, you instead are given these various gods, and they all have actual voice acting and personalities, and they bicker with each other and stuff, and for each time you level up, one of the gods will say hi to you, and you will get a selection of 3 possible upgrades related to that god, and you just choose one. And then the next time you level up, you'll get 3 more. They may be from the same one, they may be from a completely new one. It sort of changes each time, and this is how you actually build your character in each run, is based on these various blessings from all the different gods that have decided to give you some attention. And these blessings are really highly varied. There are a lot of them, and of course each god has their own sort of theme as to what their blessings tend to focus around. So winter, for instance, has a lot of ice-themed blessings that can slow and freeze enemies, whereas summer has, of course, lots of fiery stuff that can set enemies on fire or create columns of flame or drop meteors on people's heads and things like that. Also, usually one of a god's blessings relates to your basic attack and empowering it in some way. It'll add a little bit of a particle effect to it and make it do more damage, and also add some sort of extra benefit to it. Like, for instance, the Daughter of Death's augment to your attack makes it like a sort of pale green color, and also makes it sometimes fire out these big scythes that sweep across the battlefield and do a bunch of damage to enemies that they come into contact with. You'll also notice that the blessings themselves actually have a rarity, and the higher the rarity is, of course, the bigger the numbers are. Whatever it is that they do, they'll simply do better. And sometimes, as you're leveling up a blessing by selecting it again, you'll not only be making it stronger, but occasionally you can also enhance its rarity to the next tier up, and this will make it even stronger than it already was just from leveling it. And the rarities go all the way up to, I think, Master, and I've noticed that not only is it the case that, of course, rarities do affect the overall power of each blessing, but also I think there are some blessings that only appear in a higher rarity form, and you won't find them in a lesser rarity at all. Like, I noticed there's one from, I think, Justice, that basically just kills everything on screen every 30 seconds. It's sort of like the pentagram from Vampire Survivors, except for, really, it's more like the evolved pentagram, because it doesn't delete positive things like experience gems and stuff. It simply kills everything. And this system, this mechanic, is definitely what stands out the most about the game for me. It is its best aspect, and the thing that makes it sort of stand head and shoulders above a lot of other games in the genre, because it's got a lot of personality to it. And not only that, it's very interesting gameplay-wise, because it means that pretty much all of the effects that you're getting through leveling are really powerful, noticeable, fun things. This game is really good at making you feel super powerful while also still being very hard. You know, you're gathering all of these powerful effects, these blessings from various gods, and building up a sort of build based around the fact that each god has their own buffs and debuffs and their own elemental effects and things, and trying to synergize them in a way that makes you super strong. And it's really satisfying because all these effects are actually interesting and fun to use, but the game is also very challenging, and you do need this power, so it never feels like a complete cakewalk, like you've just gotten so powerful that you can just sort of kick back and watch everything explode. Instead, you do have to be very active at all times, doing lots of dashes to avoid things, because even the most basic of enemies have these red zones that they will put on the battlefield. So you're not gonna deal with enemies that have contact damage exclusively, and the only way they can hurt you is to simply touch you, and as long as you stay away from them, you're good. No, even the most basic enemies in this game do have some sort of attack, some sort of active effect that they can put on the battlefield that you gotta be aware of, and this gets a lot more complex when you deal with like bosses and elite enemies and things, and it definitely gets very challenging. You'll also notice that the game encourages exploration a lot, because in the top right you'll see a sort of mini-map, and although this doesn't show you like an exact map of the area, it does have these golden symbols on it that appear occasionally, and these tell you there's some sort of interactable feature on the map in that direction. And there are all sorts of these, and usually you'll come across them and they'll do one of two things. Usually they'll give you some sort of big buff that lasts for a short period of time that you want to save for when you really need it, or they'll give you a smaller incremental buff that actually lasts for the entire run. And so you definitely want to explore and find these, because they are a very good way to get more powerful aside from equipping new items and leveling up and getting new blessings. So overall, I would say that Death Must Die definitely stands out to me as a really good example of the genre because of its super cool god blessing mechanic. It's sort of Hades-like personality that comes along with these gods all having really good voice acting and some pretty funny lines and some other things like that. It adds a lot to the experience to have this as such a major facet of how the gameplay actually works. And I can only see the game going up from here because it's already such a good start. Despite being so early in its early access campaign, it's already this good. And it makes me think that there's a really good future in store for this game as it continues through its campaign and develops further. And of course, for the very low entry price that this genre tends to have, I have no problems at all recommending this game even in its early access state because it is really that good. And the other game I wanted to take a look at in this video is Boneraiser Minions. This one is just really cool. In general, it had a very successful early access campaign that added a bunch to it and helped to really flesh out its content in a major way. And it's also just super adorable. I mean, just looking at it, you can see that it's got a lot of personality to it. It's got a very like Game Boy Color-esque art style, and it uses it really well with super saturated colors and some really fantastic music and stuff. And the whole thing is themed around necromancy. So unlike most games in this genre where you are the character doing all the damage, in this case you're kind of a squishy wizard, and a lot of what you're doing is raising other minions, and the minions themselves are your actual weapons. So audiovisual wise, it's got this cheesy gothic horror style that I really love, and I mentioned it's sort of like almost Game Boy Color-esque art style, but also this goes along with its sort of bit crushed music and stuff having a really nice vibe to it. And I'm a fan of, like, you know, spooky vibes in general, so having this sort of silly gothic horror aesthetic going on is definitely in my wheelhouse. But in addition to all of this, it's also got a really funny presentation because it does a lot of like silly ye olde English speak and stuff, to the point that you can actually turn it off in the options menu if you want to, but obviously I didn't do that because it's great. And it's got just a really funny presentation in general with some funny dialogue, and a lot of like the wordings of everything is done in like the most deliberately silly way possible. And of course there's lots of like boner jokes and stuff too because it's skeletons, and so you're gonna see all sorts of things like that, and it's just this all-encompassing aesthetic that I really appreciate, I guess. But gameplay-wise, the way that it works is you will select an arena, although you of course only have like the main one to start with, but you will unlock more arenas later that have more advanced waves of enemies and more space to put stuff and things. But once you choose an arena, you simply walk outside and enemies will start spawning. And in this case, you will have a basic minion with you because you don't really have an attack yourself. Instead, you are completely reliant on your minions to fight for you. And as enemies die, they'll drop bones, and you can pick up the bones, and this is basically your experience system. And once you max it out, you will gain the ability to either raise an entirely new minion or upgrade a minion that you currently have. And every minion has usually 3 upgrade levels that you can put them through, and I've noticed that the upgrades are a huge deal in this game. Like, an upgraded minion is drastically more powerful than a base minion, especially once you get to the sort of purple tinge level 3 upgrades that tend to be pretty ridiculous, and you definitely want those. And of course you also want a lot of different kinds of minions because you want to be able to deal with lots of different scenarios, since as you go through a map, what's going to happen is more and more fancy waves of enemies are going to spawn, and you actually have control of this partially because some of the upgrades you can buy back at base are new types of minion waves as well as upgrading types of minions that currently exist. So as well as upgrading the stuff that you are going to be raising to fight, you can upgrade the enemies themselves and make them more varied and more difficult in order to have a harder time but more rewards. And as you are raising the various forces of darkness against all these different kinds of heroes, one of the things you'll notice is that there's a ridiculous amount of content in this game, like just an absurd amount, and they keep adding more for some reason. Like, they keep updating the game with tons of new stuff. I don't think the developer knows how to stop, but it's really admirable to watch because there's just so much here. There are so many different kinds of minions that you can raise that there are entire large categories, each individually upgradable, that you can come across. There are your normal minions of various kinds, and then there are buddy minions that have some extra capabilities. There are giant minions that are multiple others sort of smashed together into larger forms. There are these demonic minions that usually have to, well, they take a hero's soul in order to raise them. You can't just raise them whenever you want normally, and usually they take like a level 3 minion plus a hero soul, which is dropped from like an elite enemy and or a boss, and these will allow you to raise demonic minions that have all sorts of super powerful effects. There are these melded minions that are a combination of like 2 different kinds of minions into sort of like a specialized new form. They're called Meldus Minions, I believe, and there are just even more than this. There are so many different kinds of things that you can raise, and each one having their own sort of track of upgrades back home, the meta upgrade system, as well as, of course, their own upgrades in a run as you level them up and make them stronger, is pretty ridiculous, but you've also got some upgrades for yourself that you'll find. And these have a choice-based menu as well, just like leveling up and summoning new skeletons and things. You'll also be finding relics, which are powerful passive items that give you all sorts of different effects. You'll generally find these from chests or from boss drops and things, and you'll sometimes find spells as well. Once you actually unlock the mechanic to find spells, you can hold a different number of them and cast them at will, and these are scrolls that have various beneficial effects as long as you use them at the right time. They're generally situational, but very effective. There are also different classes of necromancer, basically, that you can actually be, including one that is a direct Vampire Survivors reference. That's even called that. And but there are various others as well, and these are pretty cool because they all play very differently from each other, and they have a lot of different capabilities. When you first unlock a class, it won't have very much of its unique aspects available, but once you play a couple of runs with it, you will get these currencies that allow you to go back and do some meta upgrades to improve the class. Every single class has like a full page talent tree kind of thing that allows you to unlock all the various special features and make it more unique. And that's kind of where the game, I think, is at its strongest, is just in the sheer amount and variety of content that it has. You'll find all sorts of different upgrade trees for various different things. You've got the bone-raising lore upgrades, which will unlock new different types of minions, as well as entirely new classes and stuff for you to raise. You'll also find the heritage upgrades, which are what improve each class and make it more specialized. And then you've got the heroic upgrades that allow you to unlock new waves of enemies to face, so that you can actually face off against harder and more specialized forces of heroes, but they all have their own different kinds of rewards and stuff too. And then there's all the upgrades regarding the different places that you can actually fight in, because the areas that you're fighting aren't just like flat maps, they also have quite a bit of feature to them that make them more or less difficult to navigate and stuff, and also they have different places where you yourself can construct stuff in the actual fields in order to make it easier. So you can construct some things that generate bones regularly, these grave sites that give you some experience to help you level up a little bit faster, or maybe you can create a wall of traps and lead a bunch of enemies through those to have an easier time in some of the more dense upgraded hero waves that you've created for yourself. So there's a lot of content in this game, and it's all really fun. And there's also a lot of options and stuff, which I very much appreciate. There's a huge amount of like customization and accessibility options. You can completely change how yourself, your minions, the projectiles, the heroes, and all sorts of other things look, to the point that you can give them individually colored outlines if you want, or no outline at all, if it helps you actually see stuff better, which I actually do quite like the outlines. I think it works well with the art style to help make things more visually clear. But if you find that too busy, you can just not do that if you want. And the fact that this much option is there for you to choose is a really cool feature. And you've even got stuff like making sure to always draw your character above everything else, because of course it is 2D sprite based. So if you want yourself to never be covered up and to always overdraw on everything, you can do that. And there are even more options and features and mechanics that you'll find and unlock as you go through that I haven't mentioned so far, because there's just too much to go through in one quick sort of overview video like this. But needless to say, this is, in my view, one of the best of the genre, I think, because it's so unique. It stands out amongst its aesthetics, it stands out with its mechanics, and it stands out with its options and accessibility, to all combine to be this like very fully featured, super feature-packed, like tons of content kind of experience that's just really enjoyable. Like, it's just a silly, lighthearted time with some campy gothic horror fun to be had, and a ridiculous amount of content to actually find. And it's also very challenging, I find, because of the sheer number of upgrades and meta tracks that you can purchase your way through, and all these various different heroic waves to face off against that in themselves can be upgraded individually, and there's just so much to experience here. And for such a cheap price, it's basically impossible for me to say no, because it really is an incredibly good example of the genre that manages to stand out in pretty much every aspect of its existence, from its aesthetics to its mechanics. It is just a really unique take on the genre that is a blast to play, and very endearingly campy gothic horror. in a way that I personally happen to really like. So I will also be putting the link to the Steam store page for Boneraiser Minions in the description below this video so that you can check it out. Thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this installment of Bullet Heaven. I tried to cover two things that I really have been liking a lot recently because I think they both deserve a lot of attention. So thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.